Uma década de boom tecnológico. Da criação do telefone de teclas. Do relógio sem tic-tac. E da câmera que registrou um salto gigante para a humanidade usando a mesma energia necessária para acender uma lâmpada. Descubra o segredo por baixo do capô deste Mustang e o que existe dentro dos brinquedos que resistiram ao tempo e deixaram um legado. Hoje, tecnologia dos anos 60 em Maravilhas Modernas. Maravilhas Modernas. Nas palavras da geração que a definiu, a década de 60 foi uma brasa. E se existe algo que captou o espírito da época e a transformou em ícone psicodélico, foi a luminária de lava. O interessante é que ainda hoje a companhia que a fabrica não divulga qual a composição exata que a faz funcionar. Quando contratados, os funcionários da fábrica devem jurar silêncio para que os misteriosos ingredientes não sejam revelados.
We don't really know what's inside here because it's a closely guarded trade secret. But what we do know is that the two substances are very close in density, and one of them is a waxy substance and the other is a liquid. If we pop the top, we can actually separate them and see the differences. Here comes the wax. The wax is already starting to harden, and you can see it's just like candle wax that's been melted.
A chave para a formação das bolhas é a lâmpada na base da luminária. Ela evita que a cera endureça e afunde.
The heat melts the wax and then expands it just a little bit so that it's less dense than the liquid around it and it can rise. As it gets up to the top, it cools, contracts just a little bit, gets more dense and is able to fall back down to the bottom. And that heating and cooling, expanding, contracting process is what gives this its amazing, mesmerizing look.
A febre do autorama teve início naquela década com 2 pistas comerciais. Mas em 1968, o número chegava a quase 5.000.
Some of them were as large as bowling alleys. I remember a track I raced in having 9 large tracks.
Entusiastas do autorama como Ed Harris construíam suas próprias pistas e carrinhos.
We built them ourselves from a static model kit, and then you found a motor somewhere, usually old train motors, and then you put it together yourself. I had scrounged up gears and tires and so forth, and we went from there.
O autorama pode parecer um carro real, mas sua incrível relação potência e peso fornece uma aceleração que faria Mario Andretti babar.
Slot cars are the world's fastest motorsport. A slot car goes from 0 to 130 miles an hour in under half a second. There's no real car that comes close. All slot cars get their power from the track, so they have a motor, but no batteries or power source in the car.
Quando o controlador é acionado, uma corrente elétrica passa da fonte de energia para a pista. Os trilhos passam a eletricidade para o motor do carro. E quanto mais o gatilho é acionado, maior é a corrente e mais rápido o carro desliza.
In a way, you might say like driving a car. You come into a corner, you got to slow down, and you either back off on the throttle, and then you've got to time the speed going around the curve. Go too fast, and you're going to go off. Yoo-hoo! And if you don't go fast enough, somebody's going to pass you.
By the late 60s, slot cars had really reached a peak. There were thousands of tracks all over the country, but interest started to wane, so the manufacturers looked for another way to appeal to the racers, and they came up with the Thingy. The Thingy was a dramatically styled car that they thought would appeal to the youth and racers. And these are some examples. An Asp by Classic, the Gamma Ray by Classic. This is a Garvin car and an AMT car. They were popular, especially with kids. In fact, Classic's Manta Ray was the best-selling slot car of all time. But they were very unpopular with those who had hand-built accurate models. So it really split the industry and many people believe began the collapse.
No final da década, a febre do Autorama fazia sua última volta. Mas outros brinquedos foram tão duradouros que hoje estão chegando à meia-idade, entre eles o favorito de uma geração, a lousa mágica. Sua invenção data da década de 50, quando André Cassagnès criou na sua garagem em Paris uma geringonça a qual chamou de l'écran magique, ou tela mágica.
Etch-a-Sketch, the toy you'll never tire of.
Em 1960, a empresa Ohio Art a levou para os Estados Unidos, rebatizou-a de Etch-a-Sketch e vendeu milhões.
It was very, very popular in the 60s because the whole nation was TV crazy. Everyone was crazy about the television. And here was a toy that, was on the market that basically looked like a TV, kids could draw in it. Also, Etch-a-Sketch was one of the first toys to actually have a commercial on television.
A aparência similar a um aparelho de televisão continua relativamente igual desde o seu lançamento.
If you've ever wondered what's inside, we have the taken apart Etch-a-Sketch here, and it's really simple. You've got a stylus, which is what pushes the powder off the glass to make it draw. We have a pair of rails, and really what we have is the essence of a computer plotter here. And then we have the magic ingredient that allows you to erase, a combination of aluminum beads and aluminum powder. And you might be wondering, why would this aluminum powder stick to the glass? And it's because this aluminum powder sticks to everything. It's really clingy stuff.
Os botões permitem desenhar em linhas horizontais e verticais. A maioria de nós desenha escadas e às vezes casas. Mas artistas da lousa mágica como Christoph elevaram as garatujas do brinquedo a um inédito nível artístico. Para alcançar tamanha perícia, é preciso dominar uma simples, porém importante técnica.
Basically, the secret is you have to use both knobs at the same time. If you use the knobs inward like this, you create a diagonal line. Now, if I were to use the knobs side to side in motion, you're creating the other diagonal line. And then, if you use the force, you can create a circle.
Assim, as possibilidades são infinitas. Mas cuidado! Ao terminar sua obra-prima, não chacoalhe o brinquedo. A lousa mágica não é o único brinquedo que ainda nos fascina. É o caso da saltitante bola com super impulso.
Super Ball Regular made from Zectron with 50,000 pounds of compressed energy.
When the ball was introduced, it was so revolutionary and so high bouncing that it started to develop rumors around it about where this magical rubber had come from. And, there was stuff about outer Mongolian specially bred rubber trees and all kinds of crazy stuff. People wondered, is there some kind of magical device or spring or something inside here that gives it its bounce? But if you go and actually cut it with a knife or a saw and look inside, it's just solid rubber all the way through.
Os materiais da bola são borracha de polibutadieno, a mesma usada na fabricação de pneus e enxofre. A mistura é colocada em um molde, aquecida a 160 graus centígrados e pressurizada em até 100 kg por centímetro quadrado, para que as moléculas de enxofre se fixem às cadeias de polibutadieno. O segredo da bola saltitante é a adição de 4 vezes mais enxofre do que os outros produtos de borracha, forçando assim mais ligações. As ligações são responsáveis por fazer a Super Ball quicar com 92% da altura na qual foi jogada, não importa qual seja ela. Mas o superpoder da bola aparece quando lançada.
You could just whack it into the ground and it would go like 3 stories higher. So it was shocking how bouncy these balls were. And that was what made such a huge impression. Whammo sold millions and millions and millions of these things just because there had been no ball like this ever in the history of mankind. It truly was a super ball.
Embora todos se divertissem com brinquedos inovadores nos anos 60, a década não foi apenas de jogos e diversão. O homem foi à Lua e contamos com uma câmera customizada para trazer à Terra esse momento único. Ela é chamada de tubo mágico e caixa de idiotas, mas não há como negar que a maioria de nós não vive sem televisão. Tal obsessão nos remete ao começo dos anos 60, quando o meio em evolução entrou em 90% dos lares americanos. E influenciou tudo, de escolhas de consumo à política.
The Nixon-Kennedy debates was probably the first time that television had a significant effect on the outcome of the election, purely because of the way Nixon looked compared to Kennedy.
A influência da TV chegou às alturas em 10 de julho de 1962, quando a NASA lançou o Telstar, o primeiro satélite comercial de comunicação do mundo. 3 estações em terra transmitiam e recebiam sinais do novíssimo satélite em órbita. Uma delas ficava em Gun-Hilly Downs, no Reino Unido. Outra em Plemer-Bodou, na França, e a terceira em Andover, no Maine. 15 horas depois do lançamento do Telstar, os técnicos em Andover cruzaram os dedos e tentaram a primeira transmissão.
The first broadcast was made over Telstar 1 from here, and it was an image of the American flag flying in front of the control building to Plemer-Bodou, France, the Earth station in Europe.
Enquanto as bolhas de cera subiam e desciam na luminária, outra coqueluche dos anos 60 elevou um brinquedo a status de carro. A estação de Andover continua em operação até hoje e sua localização é ideal para comunicações via satélite.
We're in a bowl here with the mountains completely surrounding this Earth station, and the mountains around here in this bowl prevented unwanted radio interference to the satellite signal. And also, we're in the northeastern part of the United States, which gave us a short loop to Europe for satellite communications.
Os equipamentos da estação passaram por 4 décadas de atualizações, mas seu processo de transmissão continua basicamente o mesmo. Para transmitir sinais de TV nos anos 60, os engenheiros de Andover puxavam a transmissão e mandavam os sinais para o Telstar.
Sending station identification.
O Telstar transitava em uma órbita elíptica entre 950 e 5.000 quilômetros acima da Terra. Os sinais recebidos por suas antenas eram amplificados 10 bilhões de vezes através de amplificadores de tubo de ondas progressivas e transmitidos para uma das outras estações. As antenas podiam ser movimentadas a fim de otimizar a conexão.
In the days of Telstar, the antenna that was used for that was very large and very mobile because it had to rotate on an axis and then travel on a track as it followed the satellite across the sky. So the antenna would literally move in order to be able to follow the satellite clear across the horizon from one side to the other.
A órbita alongada colocava o satélite em posição para transmissão transatlântica de apenas 20 minutos a cada 2 horas e meia. Hoje, grande parte dos satélites está em órbitas geossíncronas, igualando-se à velocidade rotacional da Terra e permanecendo acima de um ponto específico no planeta, o que permite uma transmissão de 24 horas por dia. Assim que nossas TVs capturam o sinal, é certeza de que as imagens serão transmitidas em cores. Mas até a década de 60, os telespectadores assistiam a telas em preto e branco.
Color television as we know it today was invented in the 50s, and the first sets were introduced to the public in 1954, but they didn't sell very well. There were a number of reasons for this. One was that the technology was crude, the sets weren't reliable. Another was that the networks didn't do much color programming because it was very expensive and they had few viewers. Finally, in the mid-60s, television took off because many of the technical problems were solved.
E como funciona a TV em cores? Você pode ficar surpreso ao saber que os sinais analógicos codificados transmitidos pelas redes e estações não são em cores. A cor que você vê na tela é feita através da interpretação das frequências de ondas dentro do próprio aparelho de TV.
Television signal comes into the antenna connections here. It goes into the tuner, which is located up inside where the channel is selected. The signal is then processed by these circuit boards, which create the black and white signal. This circuit board is to extract the color signals, red, green, and blue. They're then sent to the picture tube. And you can see I have another tube here. Inside the tube is 3 electron guns, one for each color.
Esses canhões disparam feixes de elétrons contra a tela. Os feixes passam então por entre uma tela com milhares de furos. Atrás desses furos está um grupo de 3 fósforos, substâncias que emitem luz quando estimuladas, um para cada cor. Quando o feixe de elétrons atinge os fósforos, eles acendem, e quando atingem ao mesmo tempo e com a mesma intensidade, produzem um ponto branco. Quando desligados, produzem um ponto preto. As combinações de graus variantes de intensidade criam todas as cores. Afaste-se da tela e você verá a imagem formada. A nova tecnologia ganhou o público e muitos desembolsavam $395 por uma televisão de 24 polegadas.
There was more detail, there was more to see, it was more graphic. Something like watching news of the Vietnam War, all of a sudden people could see blood in color, and that was very striking and very memorable to people and had an influence on the anti-war movement.
Apesar da revolução da TV em cores, o momento mais celebrado dos anos 60 foi transmitido em preto e branco. Em 20 de julho de 1969, mais de 600 milhões de hipnotizados assistiram à chegada do homem à Lua.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
E tal proeza televisiva exigiu um salto tecnológico sem precedentes. Tudo começou quando Stellan Barr, um engenheiro da Westinghouse, recebeu uma tarefa aparentemente impossível. O desafio era criar uma câmera compacta, forte o bastante para operar nos ambientes extremos da Lua e transmitir um sinal de vídeo a 400 mil quilômetros da Terra.
When we were faced with this, it was rather amazing as how the group that we pulled together suddenly became so focused in on this particular problem, unlike anything we had ever done before.
Lebar e sua equipe deveriam fazer uma câmera de simples manejo para os astronautas em trajes espaciais e forte o bastante para suportar temperaturas lunares entre 120 graus centígrados e 150 abaixo de zero. Um dos maiores desafios de Lebar era fazer a câmera funcionar usando energia elétrica extremamente limitada. Cabia aos projetistas da NASA distribuir a maior parte para as peças essenciais e poupar o pouco que sobrava.
They limited the amount of power that we could use on a camera to 7 watts. 7 watts is the power from one Christmas bulb.
As restrições também limitaram a largura da banda do sinal para apenas 500 kHz, 1/8 da banda de um sinal de televisão convencional, o que obrigou a equipe a projetar um novo e radical formato de câmera.
Your home television works at 30 frames a second. This one scans at 10 frames a second. Your home television had 525 lines, scan line. This one only has 320.
I was informed at the time that this camera would be of a format that had to be converted or it would not be able to be seen on regular broadcast. So we had contracted with the RCA Corporation to build a converter so that when we received this signal at the ground site, we would be able to convert that prior to transmission back to Houston and release to the public. We had a 210-foot dish in the Mojave Desert. We had one in Madrid, Spain, and we had one in Australia, which covered a 360-degree Earth as the Earth turned and our view of the moon changed.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
When we landed, at that point, I would say within 30 minutes, it became a realization that this television that was nice if you could get it but not required became the event, and it became the quote-unquote requirement. We better see the first step on the moon.
A câmera da Apollo 11 e os complexos processos de transmissão e conversão funcionariam quase sem problemas. As imagens perderam um pouco de nitidez da Austrália para Houston. E apesar da leve falta de enfoque, todos viram ao vivo Neil Armstrong dar o salto gigantesco para a humanidade. Por ironia, a NASA perdeu as fitas das imagens mais nítidas transmitidas para a Austrália e tudo que restou foi esta imagem de um monitor australiano filmado por um técnico da estação emissora. A câmera lunar mudou para sempre a tecnologia e seu impacto dura até hoje. A TV também nos apresentou ao carro que marcaria os anos 60. Uma beleza que vários executivos da Ford não queriam fabricar. Há algo de especial em um Mustang 60. E se existe um carro que marcou a época, foi esse. Mais de 40 anos depois de lançado, essa lenda da indústria automobilística ainda é capaz de virar cabeças e despertar inveja. Não é surpresa que todos queriam ter um nos anos 60 e muitos ainda querem hoje. Na época, o gerente-geral da Ford, Lee Iacocca, percebeu que os jovens entravam na idade adulta e que o mercado exigia novos carros. Em 1964, a Ford lançou o Mustang.
It caught the entire United States' fancy. Everyone wanted a Mustang. Everyone wanted to be seen in a Mustang. And sure enough, within the first 2 years, they sold over 1 million cars. The first year sales had set records. No other car had sold in those numbers. And it was all because the car was the right car, the right price, the right time, and it had the right look.
Por ironia, este ícone das ruas quase não foi fabricado. A Iacocca teve que convencer os executivos da Ford de que precisavam do seu carro e não do Falcon deles.
Well, when he first pitched the idea of this youthful young car, it was basically summarily thrown out. And the answer was no, no, over and over again, no. So that's when he decided, let's leave the glass house. Let's get out of there in Michigan Avenue, drive up the street, stop in a little motel called the Fairlane Motel, rent a room, and think outside the box, if you will. I mean, go there, go off campus, let's think this through. And sure enough, that's where the Mustang was born.
E foi exatamente o que fez a equipe de Iacocca, mas também usaram o desengonçado Falcon no projeto.
This was a typical Falcon, 1963. The Mustang is based on the car except for the styling. Basically the same platform as the Falcon. It's a unit body car, which means it's all one unit. It doesn't have a separate frame that the body bolts to. And then they added these torque boxes out here, which again is just steel plates, but it added strength to the frame of the car and kept it from flexing.
Os projetistas da Ford decidiram tentar diminuir a distância entre os eixos, baixar a posição dos bancos, reduzir o porta-malas e alongar o capô. Outra adição foi o interior bem equipado e o estilo esguio que se tornou marca registrada.
When they went ahead and they decided they were going to build a 4-seat sporty car, there was a lot of debate about what the name should be. Some people wanted to call it a Cougar, and the name Torino was tossed about.
A discussão terminou quando um carro incomum lhes chamou a atenção.
This car in front of me is known as the Mustang 1. This little car came out in 1962 as what they call a concept car. It was the first Ford car to bear the name Mustang, and it was a sensation when it came out. Ford really just borrowed the name Mustang from this car. And eventually, they decided to take advantage of all the good publicity that this little car had generated to call the production car a Mustang.
Em 1964, a criação de Iacocca finalmente chegou ao mercado.
And when it finally hit, it took the country by storm. There are great stories about people staying outside their dealerships and crowds that couldn't be contained. Every car that was in the dealership on the first day selling out.
Com um preço de cerca de $2.500, o Mustang parecia agradar a todos. Os modelos eram o tradicional, o hatch ou o conversível.
One of the keys to the Mustang success was that you could make it your own. And it's very hard today to find two of these early Mustangs that are exactly alike.
Qualquer colecionador de Mustangs dirá o mesmo.
This is a 1966 convertible. It has options of power steering. The most exciting thing is it has air conditioning. We don't find options like air conditioning on convertibles.
This is a 1967 Fastback, and it's got a neat option in here for people who like to ski. You can open up the trunk and set your skis in, and they go all the way through to a fold-down rear seat.
This is a 1968 GT. It's a high-performance 302 motor with a factory 4-speed. The wood option in the car is a deluxe interior. I have totally rebuilt this car from ground up.
Havia até um Mustang para motoristas que exigiam mais potência sob o capô.
This is a 66 GT350. Carroll Shelby took the regular Mustang in 65 on up and modified it to be a little more performance-oriented. What he did was a few modifications to the car that you normally don't have on a regular fastback.
Tais modificações incluem motor V8 e coletor de admissão e carburador especiais, a fim de aumentar a potência de 271 para 306 cavalos.
Most people would prefer to have these if they're a little more speed-oriented, a little more racing, a little more prestige. It's more of a rare car than a regular Mustang. Shelby didn't make that many of them.
Nem todos podem ter um desses, o que não significa que você não possa dirigir um.
Hertz realized that there could be a real marketing opportunity here for renting cars to people who couldn't afford to buy these things but wanted to be able to drive one. And they worked with Shelby, created a number of special GT350s. They were painted black and gold, which were Hertz's colors. They were called GT350Hs, and you could go in and rent one.
People used to come in and rent them for the weekend. That's why they called it a rent-a-racer. And they'd take them out to the drag strips or they'd take them out to the oval tracks and they'd race them. And then they'd bring them back Monday, and they had a good weekend, and it didn't cost much. Then guys started deciding that, hey, we can take these engines out of the Shelbys and put our less powerful engines back in them and use these in our everyday cars. And Hertz didn't know the difference. They were not car aficionados, they were just in the rental business.
Hoje ainda é possível alugar um desses, pois a Hertz voltou a oferecê-los aos clientes. O Mustang fez pela indústria automobilística o mesmo que essa maravilha fez pelas comunicações e este relógio fez pelos impacientes. Os anos 60 foram a primeira década com o ritmo do início ao fim e a festa podia ser levada para qualquer lugar.
No one had ever had that ability before. You could walk around and listen to your music, and even though it sounded like crap, no one really cared. It was so amazing to be able to do it that you were happy about it.
O dispositivo que possibilitou a façanha foi o transistor. No final da década, essa minúscula maravilha causou grande impacto.
Transistors are a pivotal technology, like a wheel or fire. They are so amazing in electronics, in computers.
We have here what are called discrete transistors. These are probably from the 60s and 70s. They're called discrete not because they don't tell secrets, but because they're individual transistors, each one packaged in a separate header, as they're called in the business.
O transistor foi inventado em 1947 por 3 cientistas dos laboratórios Bell à procura de substituição para a ineficiente válvula eletrônica.
They found out that they could control the current through this piece of crystal by the voltages they put on the wires. And they could put just a little bit of voltage, a little bit of current on the wires, and they would cause a large current change through the crystal.
No caso do rádio transistorizado, um sinal fraco sai da antena e passa por vários componentes até o transistor, onde é amplificado. O sinal é então direcionado ao alto-falante e traduzido em som. Não demorou para que os fabricantes de eletrônicos dos anos 60 lucrassem com a tecnologia. O rádio transistorizado chegou ao mercado na década anterior. Mas foi somente quando empresas japonesas como a Sony modernizaram a produção que ele se tornou acessível e desejado.
In the 60s, Hong Kong and Japan took over the transistor marketplace and began producing really cheap radios to the point where they dropped from 40 to 30 to 20 down to $10, and then everybody could have one, and everybody did want one.
O transistor ajudou a modernizar o rádio e fez o mesmo por outra necessidade eletrônica, o telefone. Até 1964, todo telefone contava com um disco, em que uma série de pulsos correspondia a cada dígito do telefone. Na Feira Mundial de Nova York, os consumidores da época tiveram com o telefone de tecla uma prévia do que estava por vir.
Hi, this is the Bell System's new touch-tone dialing. With this indicator, you see how many seconds you save the new way. Let's try it. Okay, I'll race you. Ready? Go.
Foi um sucesso instantâneo e literalmente deu o tom para o futuro da telefonia.
I beat you.
Once you tried the touch-tone phone, you just did not want to go back to the rotary phone because it was so darn slow. It was just, you had to turn it and then you had to wait. If you had to do a 0, forget about it. It just took forever.
O dedo e a paciência do cliente agradeceram.
If you look at this phone, you can actually see how simple it is. When you push a button, you're generating like a contact between 2 pieces of metal here, and that contact is hooking to a tone producer, and there's 4 tone producers down this line, and there's 3 across here. When you push the button, 2 separate tones are combined, and that's what's sent down the line. The reason they wanted to use 2 tones was that they didn't want your normal voice or any whistles in the background or something to get picked up and interpreted by the system.
Nos 40 anos desde sua criação, o telefone de teclas nos economizou cerca de 400 horas de discagem. As inovações dos anos 60 não revolucionaram apenas a maneira de fazer chamadas, mas também de poupar tempo. Durante 300 anos, os relógios fizeram tic-tac. Já o Accutron tinha um fluido que eliminava o barulho.
What I have here is one of the original Accutrons from the 1960s. It was originally launched in the 1960s by Bulova Corporation. It was the first revolution in 300 years in timekeeping. Prior to that, all watches were mechanical. They had a balance wheel which rotated from 3 to 5 times per second.
O Accutron era diferente. Em vez do volante giratório responsável pelo tique regular do relógio, ele possuía um diapasão.
This is actually a tuning fork that was in one of the movements, and what happened is you had a circuit that created an electromagnetic field.
O campo eletromagnético criado por pequenas bobinas de cobre vibra os ímãs na ponta do diapasão 360 vezes por segundo. Conforme o diapasão vibra, um pino a ele fixado se movimenta e força a roda a girar.
A tuning fork was not new to timekeeping. Actually, in 1866, there was a patent issued to Breguet to put a tuning fork into a clock movement. But it wasn't until the miniature of the transistor that it was capable of being put into a watch that one could wear on the wrist.
Em 1953, os engenheiros da Bulova começaram a pensar no conceito do relógio de pulso eletrônico. Depois de 7 anos de trabalho, a empresa apresentou o Ecutron ao público.
This was one of the most popular models of the 214 movement with an open face. It was called the Space View. And it was actually the jeweler's suggestion that we have the watch with an open dial. When we showed them the technology in a prototype, they said, boy, it would be great if we could show off that technology to the consumers to explain how it works.
Mais de 4 milhões de unidades foram vendidas até o fim da produção em 1977. Mas surpreende o fato de que muitos ainda se interessam por ele mesmo com a chegada da tecnologia de quartzo cristal e sua capacidade de vibrar 32.000 vezes por segundo.
People are very passionate about their Accutron, not only because it is a historic item, but it's also a collectible.
O tempo corria nos anos 60, mas a viagem não terminaria enquanto a contracultura ainda deixasse sua marca tecnológica no mundo. Entre suas várias marcas registradas, os anos 60 criaram um som próprio e marcante. Um som que expressava a rebeldia da contracultura e servia de tema para protestar, amar e ser diferente. Essa geração irrequieta se uniu no último grande evento social dos anos 60, o Woodstock. E o guru do som responsável pela explosão musical foi o engenheiro de áudio Bill Hanley. Ainda hoje, Hanley possui artefatos do festival guardados em seu quintal.
These are the mixes that we used at Woodstock, and this one and that one. These are different style ones that we had.
O maior desafio de Hanley foi tornar a música audível para aqueles que estavam mais longe do palco.
I actually picked the site for Woodstock and designed and laid it out so that the crowd went up in an amphitheater type operation. I designed the walls to funnel everybody in so that they would be in the range of the speakers. We never expected that big a crowd, so what we ended up with is people everywhere.
As necessidades de áudio de um festival de rock exigiu que os instrumentos fossem microfonados, uma inovação que logo se tornou comum.
That's the change. That's the big change in technology that we used. So I mic'd all the drums. I mic'd tom-tom, the floor tom-tom, the kick drum, the snare, the hi-hat, the cymbals up above. I had 5 or 6 mics on the drums, which was, not really done until 68, 69, except for people like Bill on large shows.
Nas décadas anteriores, os engenheiros evitavam microfonar os instrumentos de propósito, pois muitos microfones no palco aumentavam a possibilidade de retorno. Retorno é aquele barulho irritante que todos nós já ouvimos quando o microfone está muito perto do alto-falante. Mas a solução para o problema surgiu com a criação da família de microfones Shure Unidyne 3 em 1959.
This microphone was the most important advancement for the public address systems and sound reinforcement systems of the 60s era.
Antes dessa geração de microfones, os mais populares captavam som através de invólucros maiores. Já o novo modelo apresentava um formato menor e mais fino.
It's like a Christmas tree, like that, upside down, facing in. And people, if you talk in that way, you got a good pickup. If you talk in this way, you got very little pickup.
O desenho cônico e compacto e as câmaras acústicas inovadoras ofereciam um controle inédito do retorno. Já era possível levar inúmeros microfones ao palco e usar enormes alto-falantes para amplificar o som, aumentando o poder dos shows e festivais de rock da forma que conhecemos hoje. O rock dos anos 60 não se resumia a espetáculos de auditório, mas também em algo visual. Artistas como Joshua White foram os homens por trás da cortina psicodélica.
What was there before light shows came on the scene? Nothing. There was nothing there. It was a completely different time. It was the 50s, and everything was gray. And you went to a concert and you sat and watched the band, and there would maybe be a curtain in the background, and maybe there'd be a follow spot. But at the end of the 60s, the music began to really change and grow, and it took on a very distinctive American psychedelic flavor. And there was nothing to look at. It was brilliant to listen to, and there was nothing to look at. And there was a window of opportunity for the creation of the psychedelic light show, which was something you looked at while you listened to the music.
E como engenheiros visuais como Joshua White criaram essa arte psicodélica?
This is the heart and soul of what the original light shows were. It's a overhead projector, the kind that we used in high school. And then we took clock faces, and this is literally a face off of a clock. And then we began with the first and most primary thing that everybody remembers about a light show, which was the liquid part of the light show. So we took water, and then we took oil, common, ordinary mineral oil, and we would squirt it on top of the water. And this is the great secret revealed of psychedelic light shows, is that oil and water don't mix. And then we would add a little bit of color. Now you can add other elements to it, so that you can take something as simple as alcohol and squirt the alcohol in, and the plate begins to take on psychedelic qualities of its own. Everybody thinks I'm doing this amazing thing, but I'm really not. All I'm doing is supervising.
As equipes de iluminação contavam com um arsenal de ferramentas visuais tais como placas coloridas, filtros e bastões luminosos. Tudo isso para que a juventude dos anos 60 liberasse suas fantasias psicodélicas. Os anos 60 podem ser descritos como a adolescência bipolar do mundo. Nesses tumultuados 10 anos, muitos cresceram, perderam a inocência e desenvolveram inúmeras tecnologias para as décadas seguintes.